The Rangers counted 8 enemy snipers dug into the jagged ridge line overlooking the valley, but none of them expected that the quiet woman standing behind them, shoulders squared, face half-shaded under a dusty camouflage boonie hat, would volunteer to handle every single one alone. Yet that was exactly what Sergeant Lena Hale did, a name whispered in some units and classified out of others. A woman whose confirmed long-range kills were buried under more black ink than most soldiers could imagine. And as the wind rolled across the Afghan mountains, the Rangers stared at her in disbelief because the ridgeline was nearly 2 kilometers out, sloped, broken, and filled with crags that gave the enemy natural concealment. And everyone knew 8 coordinated snipers could pin down an entire platoon. But Lena simply checked her rifle. An M2010 ESR she had rebuilt herself, barrel free-floated, trigger tuned to a crisp 1.8 pounds, scope zeroed to perfection, and without saying much more. Then, I can take them. She began her slow crawl toward the Overwatch rock shelf, and the Rangers lieutenant, a cautious but competent officer named Lawson, tried to object, reminding her of the wind direction, the altitude, the mirage wobble, the shifting thermal layers, the time of flight, the risk of counter-sniper triangulation. But Lena only glanced at him with those steady gray eyes that never seemed to blink under pressure and said, "I'll be fine, sir." And something about the way she said it made even the seasoned Rangers fall silent, because she didn't sound arrogant or reckless. She sounded like someone stating a fact she had already accepted the consequences of. So they let her go, watching the woman they barely knew drag herself across sharp rocks and loose shale with the slow, deliberate movements of a professional who had spent half her life mastering the art of long-range elimination. And while she crawled, she recalled the training that brought her here. Weeks spent on windy ridges in Alaska, learning how to judge gusts with nothing but grass and instinct. Months in the sniper school where she outshot her instructors with calm, emotionless precision. The secret deployments where she disappeared for weeks and returned without explaining where she had been, the operations the Pentagon still denied existed. And above all, the lessons she learned from Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, her mentor. You don't shoot a person, you shoot the environment around them until the environment guides the bullet. A principle she felt in her bones now as she reached the shelf and slowly extended her bipod legs, anchoring the rifle into the dirt, letting the rear bag settle under the stock as she breathed out and let the world calm around her. Because true snipers didn't rush headshots, they didn't chase adrenaline, and they didn't celebrate kills. They simply performed the job with emotionless precision. And Lena embodied that ethos as she scanned the ridgeline, identifying the first sniper position, a rocky depression with a faint glint of glass where the sun hit the enemy's optic, and she estimated the distance, 1,743 meters. Factoring wind at 6 miles per hour quartering right, slight uphill angle, air density thinner than standard due to altitude, and she dialed her dope into the scope, settled, exhaled halfway, and squeezed until the trigger broke like a whispered secret, sending a 300 Win Mag round slicing through the thinning air, ignoring the slight mirage. Wobble, and 1 second later, the first sniper dropped silently backward, and Lena didn't smile, didn't react. She simply slid her bolt, chambered another round, and shifted to the next threat before the Rangers behind her even processed the first impact. And as she continued her work, the radio crackled with Ranger updates. The enemy was moving, adjusting fields of fire, trying to locate her, but Lena remained still, analyzing terrain shapes, shadow angles, and muzzle flash reflections, using every grain of training she possessed to stay invisible. And sniper number 2 revealed himself with the faintest silhouette shift on a ledge, perhaps believing he was unseen, but Lena saw the silhouette expand by a centimeter, just enough to identify a shoulder. And her second shot struck him clean through the upper thoracic cavity before he could even chamber his next round. And by this time, the Rangers watching through binoculars were stunned, whispering among themselves about how she made it look impossible to miss, even though everyone knew shots at that range required near-perfect conditions and mastery. And they were witnessing someone performing at a level beyond standard military qualification, something bordering on legendary. Yet Lena kept working, locking on his Sniper 3, a shooter hiding behind a thin rocky outcrop with only a small angle visible where the dust kicked up around his barrel. But Lena recognized the heat shimmer of his breath against the stone, a trick she learned during night Overwatch missions. And she compensated for the ricochet risk by angling her shot 5 inches left to curve the round through the gap created by wind drift. And when she fired, the bullet-fragmented stone slipped through the opening and dropped the third sniper instantly, proving to the Rangers that she wasn't simply skilled. She was engineering trajectories in real time, something even veteran snipers struggled with. And as she reacquired targets, enemy radio chatter picked up on their intercept devices, revealing the opposing squad was panicking, confused about how a single shooter was eliminating them with such speed. And while they scrambled, Lena found Sniper crouched in a shadow, only the faint glimmer of a scope lens indicating his presence. But she knew the glimmer wasn't direct reflection. It was secondary reflection from a lens hood, and she fired through the shadow, the bullet finding its mark with chilling precision. And Lawson muttered, "That's impossible." But nothing about Lena felt impossible to those who had seen her work before. And now she rolled her shoulder to adjust for fatigue, because firing multiple long-range shots required stillness bordering on unnatural. Yet she remained disciplined, shifting only enough to reset muscle alignment before taking aim at Sniper 5, who had repositioned and was angling for a counter-sniper shot, having finally triangulated her approximate location. But Lena anticipated the counter shot, using his line of sight to determine where he believed she was lying, and she shifted her position by exactly 30 centimeters, a small but life-saving move. And not 1 second later, a round struck where her head had been, carving a spark off the rock. And in response, she fired with no hesitation, eliminating him mid-exhale, leaving 3 enemy snipers remaining. And these last 3 coordinated, forming a triangular kill zone, something professionally trained adversaries did when threatened by a superior marksman. And Lena recognized the formation instantly, whispering to herself, "Smart," before adjusting her elevation, dialing back for the farther target, Sniper 6, who had shifted into a depression near a weathered tree trunk, using smart camouflage and blending his rifle barrel with a dead branch. But Lena noticed the unnatural straightness of the barrel shadow and fired low to high, letting the bullet rise perfectly into his diaphragm. And he collapsed silently, leaving only 2, and by now dust storms were sweeping slowly across the valley, reducing visibility. And Lawson called out, "Hale, visibility's dropping, pull back." But Lena ignored him because snipers relied on micro-contrast cues more than clarity, and the dust helped her far more than it hindered her enemies. So she wiped sweat from her brow, adjusted her cheek weld, and scanned for Sniper 7, finally spotting him when the wind briefly parted the dust cloud, revealing a faint muzzle brake shape behind a large stone. And she fired before he could react, her round punching through the stone's thin edge with enough retained energy to end him instantly. And now only 1 sniper remained, a commander, judging by radio chatter tone and the discipline with which he held his fire. And this last man was good, very good, because he hadn't fired a single round since the engagement began, meaning he knew better than to reveal his position. And Lena respected that. But she also understood that even disciplined shooters made micro-mistakes under pressure. So she searched slowly, scanning for patterns: broken grass, displaced pebbles, inconsistent shadow angles. And after nearly a full minute, she caught it. A small, unnatural horizontal line halfway up the ridge, the shape of a rifle resting across the edge of shallow dip, just enough to betray presence. And Lena didn't fire immediately. She waited for wind to stabilize, waited for the dust to thin, waited for the slightest movement that confirmed her guess. And then she fired a round that traveled nearly 2 seconds before striking the final sniper right above the eyebrow, ending the threat completely. And the Rangers erupted behind her, some cheering, some stunned, some simply whispering disbelief. But Lena only stood slowly, dusting herself off, reslinging her rifle, and exhaling long and steady because adrenaline ruined accuracy and she never allowed herself to celebrate. And as she walked back toward the Rangers, Lawson shook his head and said, "Hale, 8 snipers alone?" And she simply replied, they weren't working together efficiently, as though that explained everything. And the Rangers laughed because they had no idea how someone could speak so casually after performing something nearly every sniper school in the world would label statistically improbable. And when they returned to base, word spread quickly. Though Lena tried to avoid the attention, slipping away to clean her rifle and log her shots, but the Ranger platoon wouldn't let her vanish quietly. They recorded statements, sent intel reports. And when higher command reviewed the footage from their helmet cams, they realized they were looking at one of the most precise long-range engagements ever executed by a single operator, and the footage eventually reached analysts who simply stamped the report exemplary, recommend continued deployment, and filed it away under restricted access. But the story didn't end there, because when the platoon returned stateside, the Rangers told everyone about the mysterious woman sniper who saved them. And eventually the story reached audiences everywhere, including you watching this right now on our Brave Stories, where we share the untold courage of extraordinary women around the world. So if you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, support the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this deserve to be heard, honored, and remembered. And Lena Hale, the woman who took on 8 snipers alone from a ridgeline, remains one of the most remarkable, quiet professionals to ever walk the battlefield.